Alright, look, I've been watching quite a lot of my own videos and I've got a new method. I think it's going to work. Okay, today, this video, all I want to do is just put the rings on the pistons and we'll put them in the bore, in the barrel. First of all, just a few things about the bike that I've noticed. I don't know if anybody out there saw it, but the rear piston, the arrow pointed toward the rear. So that's front there. Okay, so that's how they were. That's the rear head. It's got rear written there, and the piston was facing that way with the arrow pointing toward the exhaust port. And we've got the two intakes there, and we've got the front head, and we've got the arrow, and that was pointing toward the front exhaust port. So the arrows pointed toward the exhaust ports. So that was how the pistons were originally arranged on the engine. So that's exactly how I'm going to put them back. Another thing, the gasket that's on the crankcase, where the barrels sit on the crankcase, that gasket's very hard to get off. I've tried everything, all sorts of chemical cleaners, paint stripper, and it just won't bubble up. The paint stripper can't affect it, and the only way I'm going to get that off is to scrape it off, I think. I'll be careful, but I don't particularly want to scrape it off. A correction to the previous video where I removed the barrels. What I should have done is brought the pistons down so that I could remove the barrels, and but before I removed the barrels I should have stuffed this crankcase with rags, because as you could see in the previous video, there was a busted ring, and if that had fallen into the crankcase, it would have been a very, very sad story indeed. So stuff the crankcase with rags before you remove the barrel. The ring compressor is from Pengefi Quibayo. We found one with the Came Qatar on the world. Part number PF32033. Okay, top groove, second groove, third groove. I'll give you the prices and the information for these tools and parts. That's the ring compressor on eBay, Australia. It now costs $9.05. It cost me $10, but that was during Christmas of 2015 when I purchased it. Piston ring compressor. 53 to 150 millimeters, height of 83 millimeters. The piston ring set was from Speed Outfitters, Hastings 6164, cast ring set, standard bore, and yeah, mine should be a standard bore, but check the ring gap. At the end of 2015, US is $36 and 704 cents delivery. For me it's $53.09 and $10.17, so 53, 63, 63.50. From Elkhart, Indiana. I was in Indiana in 86, around about 1986. One thing that really surprised me about these rings were they fit just about every Harley out there. So the number one page, we got 1350cc 97 Bad Boy FX ST. We've got wide glides, super glide, lowrider. We go to the last page, page 10. We got 1200cc Sportster 1200, XLH 1200. You know, from 86 down to 98, and I've got a 2003. Okay, what I'll do is get the second groove piston ring, and I'll try that in the bore. Okay, so when I put the old ring on top of the new ring, and I give them the same distance out along here, when I look at this edge here, there's actually 1 millimeter difference. So the old ring is 1 millimeter inside of the new ring. So the rings are definitely worn. When I sit them on top of a barrel, you can see that the new ring sticks up further than the old ring. Okay, so the new ring's in the bore there, and what I'll do now is I'll just insert the piston in the bore. Pull the piston out, and I'll measure that gap. The gap is 0.018 or 0.45 millimeters. Okay, so that was the front cylinder, and now the rear cylinder. Again, I've got the second groove piston ring, and I'm going to place that in the bore, and I'll push it down. We've got the rear, I'll get the rear piston, and I'll push that down. And I've got the same feeler gauge. Yeah, that seems like the one. It's a bit tight. That is definitely 0.018 or 0.45 millimeters. So I think that's the same. Okay, the measurements they've got in the manual for the compression ring end gap is 0.007 to 0.020, and this is 0.018, and the service limit is 0.032. So it's 32 is the service limit, and it's 18, so it's all good. Okay, so next I have to wash these parts in warm soapy water. dry them, and I'll install the rings. Okay, this is a rear cylinder. The top piston ring and the middle piston ring are both 0.018 in measurement, or 0.45 millimeters. But the oiler rings, there's no feeler gauge wide enough to to measure the gap. So the gap's actually a fair bit wider. Okay, look, I don't know if I'm doing this right, but I can't even get a 0.05 millimeter feeler gauge down in that gap there. It only goes down about so far. So I'll just take it there good and move on. Okay, look, I'll just point out at this stage that these are all rectangle. When you look at the edge of the piston ring, the shape is rectangle. There's no edges or inward cuts or notches or anything. The second groove, you might be able to see there that it's also rectangle. Now the top groove, they call it, it's also a rectangle. The only difference that I can see is the second groove has a notch somewhere. Yeah, there it is. It's fairly hard to see, but it's like a centre punch mark, and it's just above my fingernail there. Okay, the directions are as follows. Place spacer in groove, spiral steel rail into groove above spacer. So put the spacer in, then put a ring on top of the spacer, and then spiral remaining rail into groove below spacer. Okay, so with the piston removal video, we saw that these tabs, they go up and down, and at the ends here they point down on either side. So for some strange reason, they say to put the top ring above the oil spacer there. So if that's what they say, that's what I do. I don't agree with it, but there it is on top of the oil ring. Okay, so there's no pattern about which way they go. There's no centre punch mark anywhere, so obviously it doesn't matter. So I'll put that below and spiral it in, just like they say. There it is. Okay, a bit of oil, and we can see the centre punch mark just there. That's the top ring. There's no centre punch mark there. So that's how the manual explains to stagger the ring end gap. So you've got one end gap there and one there on the oil rings, and then that's facing back, and here facing forward you've got one at sort of 10 o'clock and one at 2 o'clock facing forward. The manual also says that the top ring isn't marked and the second the second compression ring is marked, so that's standard. Okay, that's the rear of the bike there, and as I said, when I disassembled the engine and removed the piston, the arrow was pointing rearward toward the exhaust port. Okay, so that's how the manual says to do it. There's the bottom, there's the gudgeon pin, there's the bottom oil ring, there's the top oil ring, and there's the top oil ring and the bottom oil ring. That's how they're staggered. So that's the gudgeon pin there. That's the centre, and that's the top, that's the bottom stagger. With the compression rings, they're just a little bit further out. They're approximately like that. I remember when I was a kid, about 10 years old, I used to change the rings on a two-stroke. I used to just put the rings on and just push the rings in with my fingernails into the barrel, and that was it. The good old days, the mid-70s, late 70s, early 80s. Yeah, they were good times. Okay, It's just about in the... Ooh. Okay, beautiful. Rough and ready. Okay. Chuck this one in. Top groove. Alright, beautiful. Okay, the rear oil rings are staggered 11 and 1, 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, and the front is 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. There's the gudgeon pin. Okay, so there's the dowel pin line up hole there. So that's the front, and with the front piston, the arrows pointing to the front of the bike toward the exhaust. Just an observation, the front cylinder, the piston seems to be a little bit more sticky in the bore than the rear cylinder, so I'll just demonstrate that. But it is freeing up though, I've got to say. Okay, so compared to the rear cylinder, the front cylinder again, we remember this is the one with the cracked piston ring. And it was also gummed up and a black piston. So, but yeah, it feels fine, feels good. Okay, over and out. These are the recommended jets. I got them, and I'll install them before I start the bike up. The jets I'll be running in the carburetor on startup is 185 main jet and 45 secondary jet.